G'day everyone, welcome to episode number 25 of the Cold-Blooded Contributions Podcast. The Cold-Blooded Contributions Podcast is proudly sponsored by Midwest Tongs. For over 40 years, the Midwest Tongs team has provided the highest quality snake handling tools made in the USA. Made by professionals for professionals. We're your hosts, the Ipers. I'm Ty Iper, and with me is my husband, Scott Iper. This podcast will bring to you people in the hobby who have made an impact on us creatively, be it artistically, with data, or improved our husbandry. Today we're stoked to have with us Jake Meney. How you doing, Jake?
I'm great, guys. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming on, especially on such short notice too. We haven't really got a grip at the moment.
We made it happen.
We did. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, Jake?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I'm based down south of Sydney. And I work full-time as I guess my whole career I've worked as a zookeeper. I've worked at two different facilities at the Australian Reptile Park for almost 8 years. And then a few years ago now, I moved down to Symbio Wildlife Park. And most of that has been with herps, of course, but I've done a lot of varied different things within the zoo industry. But I guess prior to that, going right back to the beginning, my initial interest in reptiles probably started when I was 4 or 5. And I don't exactly know where it came from, to be honest. My parents are not wildlife people really, although they did certainly, I guess, foster my interest and did a lot over the years to, kind of put me where I am. But I don't know where I kind of picked up reptiles from. I guess I was growing up in like the late 90s when, TV was full of wildlife presenters, like, of course, Steve and Jeff Corwin and, just there were snakes and reptiles all over Animal Planet and even mainstream TV at that time. And, that probably had a pretty big role to play. And then as I went through school, it just progressed more and more. I began keeping. I got my first lizard when I was 7, and then right through my teen years, I had a room full of reptiles and kind of the standard story there. And somewhere along the way, I picked up herping as well. I think I was maybe 12 or 13 when I first went herping. I kind of conned my dad into taking me out, and I can still remember the first, or I guess the initial spark for herping. I was doing what a lot of people did back in those days. I was on the old Aussie Pythons and Snakes forum, and I know it was a good site back in the day. And I remember a user put up a little report about herping in the Blue Mountains, and they'd seen a bandy at night, of course, in the lower Blue Mountains at Jellybean Pool. And that was like 10 minutes from my house. And at that point, a bandy was just the wildest, craziest looking snake. And I thought, wow, like you can actually go out and, and see some of these things out in the bush. And so I started making a few outings with my old man. And I think as a lot of people did when they first start herping, I was out on days that were way too hot, or nights that weren't overly suitable, and never really saw much for a fair while, aside from maybe the odd big lace monitor on a hot day or some red bellies. But as the years went by, I kind of figured out how to see some things, and that obsession kind of snowballed pretty badly, and still to this day I'm a pretty obsessive herper. I don't get out as much as I did a few years ago. Now that I've got a little man to kind of look after as well, it makes trips a little bit more difficult. But yeah, that's kind of where it started. And I came on as a zookeeper initially at 19, so straight out of school pretty much. Had a year or so in between, and then straight into zookeeping. And that's kind of been my life for the last decade or so now. I'm just about to tick over 30, so it's been a bit big last decade.
We can't remember that far back.
What was your handle on Aussie Pythons, mate?
I honestly can't even remember. It was probably something super creative, like Jake Snake, or just something like that. But everyone always had those kind of funny nicknames on there. But
I didn't, mate. I confused the bloody surname. there was no fucking.
I don't recall ever posting on there. I just used to kind of cruise through the pages and see what was for sale and see what other people were doing and how they were keeping and herping. And obviously, Field Herp Forum for a while there too was pretty massive. I do remember making a few posts on that. But yeah, no, it was good back in those days. There was still a bit of drama here and there, but nothing like what we see these days with Facebook. So it was good.
I think it was always there was a bit of camaraderie in there. There was some rivalries at times, but there was a fair bit of camaraderie. And I think most people in both Field Herp Forum and Aussie Pythons, people were pretty friendly for the most part, and they'd help each other out and all the rest of it. You'd see some stupidity on there occasionally, but for the most part, it was always pretty good.
But I remember back in the day when the internet first came out, we're that old, and then it sort of went from not much at all to bigger with the forums and that. They were friendly, they were nice, because there was no Facebook. You still had to present yourself if you were a dickhead or something like that. There were repercussions. Now, no.
Yeah. No, and there was, there's I think the admins back in the day were a lot more onto it, and they'd kick people out, and they'd keep things pretty civil. And I remember even Aussie Pythons and Snakes. I remember Aussie and Pythons and Snakes even kind of went into the real world a bit. Like they'd throw a Christmas party and that. So it was kind of more of a community, I think. But yeah, it was a good kind of initial step for me to kind of enter the community and the industry.
I think it's a good way for like young kids, or it certainly was a good way for young kids to chat with adults and stuff like that as well,
or even older first-time keepers.
Yeah, get some guidance and start those conversations. There's quite a few herpers that I remember were really young kids that have turned into pretty incredible herpetologists these days.
Absolutely.
That started off in those things, right?
I was thinking when we hit Jake up, and he's like, I was like, I remember when I first met Jake. He was so young.
I was young. I would have been. I think I would have been maybe 19 at that point. But yeah, it was good. And
the run around with Hilly out in the scrub.
That was a good few days. That was probably actually my first kind of taste of the arid zone. I'd obviously done a fair bit around Sydney and maybe a little bit further afield, but certainly my first kind of taste of Western Queensland. And got quite a few ticks that trip. It was great.
Yeah, I got a couple of ticks that trip as well. I
got a lot of peace.
I think it was the first time I got a brand new work car too, and I remember reversing into a fucking bin out at Quilpie or something like that, and did $3.5 grand worth of damage to the back of the fucking car, and nothing was said. I just said that. I said to when I got back to work, someone goes, "What happens to the brand new car?" And I said, "Oh, I came out of the shops and it was like that." I said, "Oh, sorry." And they go, "Oh, okay, all right, no worries."
Never mind. All good. Carry on.
Fucking hell.
Love it.
Yeah, that was
funny. I've done I was going to say I've done obviously a lot more travel since then, which has been amazing. Kind of in my early 20s, when I was a bit more free, I was doing 3-4 decent trips a year, and I think at this point I've seen really the bulk of the places that I kind of want to get to. There's obviously still some gaps. Like for me to say that I've done a full lap of Australia, I've still got to do the Eyre Peninsula. I've done nothing down there. Oh, sorry, I should correct that. I've done a little bit in the Eastern Eyre Peninsula, but I've never done the west portion or the Nullarbor. And then I also haven't done the stretch between Darwin and Kununurra. So I've done the Kimberley, but I've never really done the East Kimberley or that stretch through into the NT. But aside from that, I've pretty much done a full lap and done a lot in Central Australia. a little tiny bit in WA, not as much as I'd like, because obviously that's it's a big mecca over there, and that's kind of a big gap in my herping career, I guess you could say. But lots in Queensland, lots in New South Wales.
I think if you really wanted to tick off a shitload of those species, you almost need to move to WA.
Yeah,
or if
you need to base yourself
WA, you almost need to move to the East Coast. You can't. You almost can't do it in trips, so to speak. There's too much.
There's too many
on both sides.
Yeah. And I gave it a good crack in 2018. I did a week in the Northwest Kimberley, and then I flew back home and was home for like 2 or 3 days, and then flew back over and was in Perth for a couple of days, and then we went right up to Exmouth, and then right out to the Pilbara, and then we drove all the way back down through the Midwest, all the way down to like Denmark, like right down on the south coast, and then back up to Perth from there over 3 weeks. So I spent almost a month in the state and covered it, a good portion of it, but still, you feel like you're touching none of it. Like there's still so much of that state that is left to see. And of course the eastern portion of it is like, it's remote so it's hard to get to some of those places too.
But imagine doing that right now. Like, how much would that cost you
with the
right
fuel.
now in fuel?
Yeah. Well, even then
get the fuel to do it.
Yeah. Well, even then we really struggled to get a car with unlimited Ks on it, and we ended up getting a Prado that we could do as much as we wanted to, but it was expensive, and we ended up doing, I think, like maybe 12 or 13,000 Ks in that 3 weeks. So to do that now would just be pretty ridiculous. Or, I remember going out to, I remember my first trip out to Yulara, and back then fuel in Sydney was maybe like a bit over $1 a litre. And then I got out there and it was $2 a litre. And I was like, oh my God, this is so expensive out here. and now it would be probably twice that out there. So it's that's one of those things I'm kind of glad I did a fair bit of travel when I did, because it's getting harder and harder.
So is that the is that one of the things that you are hoping to see in that part of the world, mate? Or
well, that lizard there. Have you guys still got me?
Yep, gotcha. It just had a little conniption for half a second then.
You're right. Yeah. So that was up in the central Tanami. I have seen their burrow systems down further south in those deserts around Yulara, but access around twilight and at night in those areas is a little bit tricky sometimes, particularly where I know where the burrows are. Up in the central Tanami, we spent a few days, probably around 4 or 5 days, just camped up at the one spot and targeting womas primarily. And I was up there with a few guys that were right into their mammals as well. So we were, of course, looking for bilby and a few other critters. But the Kintori was something that I was very, very keen to see, and they weren't easy. Like
a young one, that one too. It's not an adult.
Yeah, no. So I definitely saw adults. I saw quite a lot of them. I would spend almost every night just kind of parked up outside their burrows, just with a red torch on, and they were very wary. Like they certainly weren't confidently coming out and sitting, but you'd get the odd glimpse, like they'd come out like that to their back legs, but that was about all you got. And because it was simply too hot up there to be doing much road cruising, I just ended up putting most of my time at night time into observing these incredible skinks. And finally on the last night, I was able to get some photos, because up until then, I was getting fleeting glimpses, but not much more than that. And the adults were very, very wary. So it kind of took that little juvenile with a bit of naivety to for me to get a photo. But it was was a great trip overall. It was hard. Like, I think most days up there it was maybe 45, 46 degrees, and there was nothing to do during the day. Like, we were just camped out a few hundred kilometers north of Yuendumu, which is that kind of decent sized Aboriginal community out there. So we were pretty remote, but it was great. And we spent a bit of time in Alice before and after, a little bit of time around Tea Tree as well on the way back. A lot of time targeting womas, but no such luck with those. We actually saw something one morning which was pretty cool. I can't exactly remember what species of raptor it was. I'm not massive into my birds, but there was a small bird of prey of some sort that flew off with a adult Modesta. So that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
No, you're right. So your shirt there that you're wearing, it looks like a Chiricahua Desert Museum. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Old Rumsey's had to throw it out there.
He kindly gifted me this shirt a little while ago, so had to wear it just for him. So
just for Jake.
And was the cap a rub-in for me, or?
Oh, they're good caps. They're good caps. I never
got
take
a
them
limited amount, and I was like, "Oh, I really want these two." And then you got that one. Dan got the other one. And I was like, "Fuck."
Well, I did the US in 2019, and actually went to one of the big shows over there. I went to the Pomona reptile show in Southern California, which is huge. I think they get something like, probably like 12 or 15,000 people over the few days. And Eco had a table there with just like everything you could possibly imagine. And I always regretted not buying more. I bought a couple of hats and a couple of books, but I have always wanted, especially the Gila Monster hat. So thank you for linking me up with that.
It kills you though, to buy it when you get back, the currency exchange and then the freight out of the US is ridiculous.
Yeah,
probably
absurd.
A lot worse now, but yeah, we do the same. We come home and we're like, we should have bought that. Like, we could have chucked that out and made more room. It's catch-22.
That's it.
So was this one of those things from that little US jaunt? Was it?
Yeah, it was. My wife and I headed over there for a month. It wasn't exclusively herping. She's very understanding, and she's very she gets involved when she needs to, but I wouldn't say she's a herper by any means. So we did do a few things. Like we did New York, and we did we did Disney and those kinds of things. But I said, if we're going over there, we need to spend at least a week in Southern Arizona. And essentially the whole trip was based around seeing a Gila monster. When we first went to the travel agent and was starting to organize the trip, she asked what month we were thinking about going, and I just kind of cut in and was like, oh, maybe August. and she was very perplexed as to why we wanted to go to Southern Arizona in the middle of a monsoon. And I had to explain that there was an orange and black lizard that that was the peak time to see them active. And so we got into Tucson one afternoon after driving down from California, and of course, we were heading out herping that night pretty much straight away. We had the car, we were ready to go. We were in some accommodation, maybe like 10, 15 minutes from some nice desert. And so we head out, we start cruising this particular road, which I had been told was good for things like tiger rattlesnakes and western diamondbacks and a whole host of kind of other more common, Southwest US species. But I had been told there was a chance for healers, but then it's not something you see frequently. And literally the first reptile on our first night ever of road cruising, a young Gila monster just crossing the road. Right.
Everything pressure's off. Done.
I think Well, that was night 1 of 5. So the pressure was just completely off after that. We could focus on other things. And that was amazing. It was such a nice little lizard, and we did okay that night. We did get atrox that night as well. I think we might have seen a gopher snake that night, but the healer was obviously the standout. And the funniest part of the whole thing was that the very next morning I was right down south in some montane habitat looking for lepidus and willardi, and I think you had the lepidus up there before.
Just find it. There it is.
There it is. Yeah, so that was one of the lepidus we saw. I went down there on my own. Brody decided to stay back in the accommodation that morning after what was a pretty late night, and I actually ran into a group of, I think, 8 herpers that were over from South Carolina. And they had been by that point they'd been in Arizona for 2 weeks and they hadn't seen a healer. So you can imagine.
That's the best. That's even better.
Yeah, you can imagine me rocking up saying, "Oh yeah, I just got here last night. We found a healer." But
they would have gone, "What? A healer?"
But we actually managed to join forces that morning, which was handy because when you're looking for these lepidus and willardi, you're essentially just doing like transects on foot up and down rocky hillsides, and it would have been hard for me to do on my own. So we ended up, I think, between the 9 of us, we found like maybe 7 or 8 lepidus pretty quickly, pretty easily. And then it started to get real hot, and we were a bit worried we weren't going to see willardi. So we kind of moved right back down to a creek, and we're just kind of hitting the shaded areas, cooler areas along the water. And one of the guys found a willardi in some pretty long grass, and typical US herper, had the tongs straight on the snake, mid body, just clamping the hell out of this thing, and just had it up in the air above his head like a proper victory pose with this poor little willardi that was just being clamped, like, so they do things differently over there. They were bugging out a bit when I was tailing some of the rattlesnakes, but I think they kind of got the picture after a while that it was just kind of what we're used to, and that's how we handle snakes. And I've worked with Crotalus before in captivity too. We had atrox at ARP, so I wasn't a complete stranger to pit vipers and how they kind of work. But there was certainly a good few new species for me on that trip that I hadn't ever experienced before. I got speckled rattlesnakes as well. Quite a lot of atrox. Over the 5 nights, I think I saw close to 40 rattlesnakes in total. So it was very, very productive. I think when that monsoon on and the conditions are just perfect, the snakes are just moving. But more than half of those were atrox. They were by far and away the most common one, and then just a few other kind of species in the mix as well.
I've been told by a few people that you might see 20 snakes in a night, but 15 of them will be atrox. Of varying sizes. So a bit like our carpets, I suppose. You sort of think, you end up just like driving around the carpets as you go past.
And that was what it was like towards the end of those 5 nights. Like that first night, the first atrox that I got, the brakes are on, I'm out, I'm pumped. And then by night 5, I was literally like if it was a quiet road, I was just kind of like going around them. And it was like peak birthing period as well. So out of those, 25 odd atrox I saw, probably 15 were like little neonates. They were just all over the roads trying to get as much heat as they kind of could late in the night. Saw a lot of. No, they were one I tried hard for. I had a couple of roads that I was hitting pretty hard because I'd been told, you get beautiful, nice yellow molossus in these areas, and I just never came across them. But did get tiger rattlesnakes, quite a few of those in the end. The very last tiger rattlesnake that I saw on the last night was a bit of an interesting one. I got out of the car and was looking at this thing on the road and was just looking at its face, and just something didn't look right about it. And on closer inspection, it had like dozens of tiny little cactus spines embedded in its face and all in its pits and nostrils. And I'm not sure whether it had eaten something, and it had, like, in the process of swallowing it, maybe a rat had kind of got its face all caught up in a cactus. But it looked very uncomfortable for the snake. So a little bit like I moved it off the road and was kind of umming and ahhing what to do. It was a very, very quiet one. So I did make the decision to pin it and kind of help it out a little bit. Because I did have a little pair of tweezers in my camera bag, and so I was just able to kind of pick out the worst of it, like the ones that were in its pits and its eyes. I kind of got those out for it, and then it had a few still around its neck and that I just kind of left there, assuming they'll probably come out with the next shed. But but I think that snake was pretty grateful for that, because it was it was a pretty relaxed tiger rattlesnake, which was quite the opposite to the other tigers that I saw over there. They were pretty rolled up. It was just an interesting one.
We've never had the experience of playing with wild rattlesnakes, but certainly some of the captive ones that we played with over the years, the strike distance that they have compared to a lot of our stuff, the stuff that we're used to working with, is quite considerably different. So you can understand the Yanks being a little bit sort of concerned if they didn't realise that you'd had some experience with cradlers. So especially Pyrrhus, the speckles, they were they were pretty full on. Like I certainly didn't touch any of those. Pretty easy to just sit on a hook anyway. But when they were down and they were fired up, they were literally striking with that much force that they were shifting their whole body, like a foot forward. So if you were to kind of misjudge things there, you could definitely wind up with some trouble. And there was a few of the Atrox too that were pretty rolled up. A few of the bigger ones that kind of had a bit of confidence about them. They were they were a bit full on. But I actually got to do something really cool on one of the nights. I just reached out to someone that I'd seen through Instagram that was doing was part of a very long-term mark recapture study on Gila monsters at a golf course in Tucson. Because this golf course is watered and is beautifully landscaped, and they're just pouring a ton of resources into it, it's just basically become like this little gold mine for reptiles to flock to. And at night they have just enormous numbers of not just herps but just wildlife in general living in and around the golf course. And so as part of the university, their students do a nightly transect on the golf buggies and actually just do the little cart course and just kind of work out what they see and look at abundance and things like that, and changes over time. But it's basically an insanely productive area for Gila monsters. If I hadn't have seen one prior, like a proper wild one, I don't know if I would have counted these ones that we saw, because they're just kind of like a guarantee there almost. We saw, I think, three that night. And we also saw we also saw tiger rattlesnakes and a couple of Atrox and a few other bits and pieces. But you get Mojaves there as well, where you were?
Not so much. No. I was herping a lot of higher elevation areas, especially when I was targeting targeting blacktails, and from what I understand, you tend to get Mojaves a lot more in the low desert. So I didn't actually see a Mojave, which I would like to get across and do. I really think if you wanted to herp Arizona thoroughly, you would need 2 to 3 weeks to kind of really mop up most of what you wanted to see. Like, I didn't get anywhere near where you get Cerberus. I didn't see a coral snake. I didn't even see a horned lizard. Like, there was so many things that I kind of had to sacrifice just to kind of target Gila monsters, which didn't work out to be much of a mission, and then see some of those other rattlers.
Sure, certainly, it doesn't sound like you had a bad time, though. That's for sure.
It was a very nice little introduction to US herping, and I also did get out a little bit in southern Arizona. Arizona, Southern California. Saw a California king snake, but unfortunately, it had literally been just hit on the road. And then I also saw two Helleri that had been cleaned up by cars as well. So would have been nice to add those 2 species alive, but it is what it is. Southern California is a pretty densely populated area, so it's a little bit trickier to herp on some of those mountain roads.
And also the different laws in the different states too. Like when we were looking at going over, you can do this in this state, you can't do this in this state, and you need a license to do this in this state. Don't touch anything in this state. You're sort of like, fuck.
Yeah.
Got to wear high vis on the rock.
Species as well. Yeah. That's in West Texas. They're pretty strict about that over there. And even in Arizona where I was, like I could have tiger rattlesnakes and western diamondbacks and speckled rattlesnakes in bags in the car. There's no legislation around that. But if you even look too long at a Gila monster or a lepidus or a willardi or a price eye, they're coveted kind of protected species. So they're very strict with some stuff, and then like super lax with other stuff. So it can definitely get a bit confusing, and I'm sure you could come unstuck.
To be fair though, right, it's actually not that bad a methodology in a lot of ways, right?
No,
because if you're stringent about the stuff that requires protection, right, and then you don't waste your time with the stuff that doesn't, right? Because at the end of the day, right,
you can put more resources into the stuff that does need protection.
Yeah, and if someone is doing the wrong thing with something that is threatened, right? And a classic example of that would be say red bellies versus broadheads or something like that, right? It doesn't matter if somebody's, in the scheme of things, obviously, it doesn't matter if somebody adjusts the movement of a red belly black snake for a few minutes for a photo, right? It's not going to damage the habitat. It's not going to damage the way the species interacts or anything like that. Whereas you get some people, particularly in winter, and they go and destroy some broad-headed snake habitat trying to get a few photos or worth poaching them or something like that. They can realistically do some damage now, and that's where there's a difference, So it's one of those things, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's quite funny over in the States. They will go to great lengths to catch people out too. Have you heard about the whole Gila monster situation with baiting people with captive live healers, or even artificial healers,
or rubber ones? Yeah.
It's
painted rubber ones and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's it was something that I was a bit wary of, but thankfully that first healer I got was a little juvenile, so I was pretty confident it wasn't the big captive slug that they used to catch people out.
Well, the other side of it too is I'm an Australian. I'm sorry, I didn't realise. I saw a cool lizard walking across the road.
The best Aussie accent.
I can play dumb tourist if I needed to.
Yeah. Maybe. Not if you're wearing that hat, though, mate. That might
No, that's a bit,
be a bit of a giveaway.
that's it.
You said you're a zookeeper. How long have you been a zookeeper? Oh, no, you answered that. Sorry. I suck when I don't get my questions in order. It's so awkward. Did you always want to be a zookeeper?
Not necessarily. I always wanted to work with reptiles, but really until I kind of entered zookeeping, I really wasn't too sure whether I did want to go down the academia path or get involved in surveys or consultancy or one of those other avenues with herps. But I did obviously start just volunteering at the reptile park, and I guess fortuitously and thankfully I was I obviously went into it with a fair bit of prior herp experience, so I was offered a job pretty quickly, and just kind of fell into it and started making some great connections and have worked with some amazing people over the years, and it's been a really great career for me, and it's taken me to a lot of places, and I've done a lot of things within the zoo industry. Part of that is obviously a little bit of the conservation side of things as well, not just on the ground in the zoo itself, but I did end up getting to do a bit of field work and things like that as part of my job anyway. So it's been great, and I can see myself at least being involved with zoos for my whole career. Whether that kind of shifts and changes over time, it likely will. It kind of already has, but it's good. It's really good.
So you said you used to work at ARP and you're still working in the zoo industry. So whereabouts are you calling home these days? Where's your work home?
Yeah, so home base for me now is Symbio Wildlife Park, which is in Helensburgh in I guess southern Sydney in the Sutherland Shire, and it's a really really beautiful place. It's I've long admired Symbio and everything they do. They're pretty heavily involved again with conservation, not only at the park, but ex situ as well. Ex situ and in situ, I should say, and they just do exhibits really nicely. It's a great crew, and it's a place where I'm very, very happy, and it's given me a bit more of a chance to do some different things as well. I guess for that first portion of my career, it was very, very herp focused. I essentially did nothing else for 8 years aside from keep and manage a pretty large herp collection, which is incredible, but it sometimes could be stressful and could sometimes get a bit repetitive as well. So it's been nice to do some different things and get involved with some different taxa as well. Because at the end of the day, I'm a herp nut, but first I'm a wildlife enthusiast. I love all animals, and it's been nice to kind of explore that a bit more in a place that isn't so necessarily herp focused. In saying that, majority of our conservation programs are herp based, so it's certainly still a place where you can get your reptile fix.
Yep. I feel though that you do need a place like Symbio for the reptile conservation because they're scaly. They're not feathery and fluffy and cute as deemed by the general public sort of thing. So they
certainly
do get...
herpers would suggest that they are definitely
Oh, no, but they get overlooked in conservation because everyone...
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, so,
For all of history, people have been struggling to get funding for reptiles and invertebrates and fish and essentially anything that isn't covered in fur and you can cuddle. It gets very, very tricky sometimes, and we still see that even today. But thankfully, I think a lot of people are coming around to some of these lesser known species and the role that they can also play in our ecosystems and the importance of those. I don't want to use the word thankfully, but you know, in the last decade or so, there has been a few pretty high priority herp species that have come on the scene. Obviously, the Victorian grassland Elis dragon. You know, that there was a lot of press and commotion when that was rediscovered, and rightly so. And I think that, you know, that species in particular maybe perhaps opened people's eyes a little bit to these little critters that could just be sitting there unnoticed for decades, essentially, you know, thought to be extinct. But you know, there it was, just out of Melbourne, and yeah, I think that's going to perhaps even happen more and more and more. And one of the species
hopefully
we're
we get
involved
to
with
repeat it with the Bathurst ones, huh? Hopefully we can repeat it with the Bathurst ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the key species that Symbio are involved with alongside Taronga is Bellinger river turtles, and I am pretty confident in saying that you know, if the zoos didn't get involved when they did, that species would likely no longer be around. They would be functionally extinct, if not entirely extinct in the wild. So it is certainly an important role that modern zoos play. You know, we're not just menageries or, you know, places for people to go and gawk at animals these days. But in saying that, you know, that's still a huge part of why zoos exist, for people to go and have a good day and have a day out with their family and appreciate animals. So we you know, we don't want to get too far away from that. I think to say that zoos are, you know, exclusively about conservation is a bit of a stretch. I think zoos still need to be there to serve that role as places for people to go and enjoy the outdoors and enjoy wildlife. But it's certainly a big part of what modern day zookeepers do today.
I think too, like, there's been a shift where people are less inclined to say that they enjoy seeing animals in captivity, right? Because it sometimes isn't necessarily the most PC thing out there, right? But at the same time, one of the best ways, and you know, we've been educating the public now for, you know, I've been doing wildlife demonstrations and things like that since before I was 10 years old, right? And so, you know, taking animals down to scout groups and doing all that sort of stuff, and then assisting other demonstrators before, you know, forming our own business and doing it ourselves. You know, with the decades and decades that we've done with bringing and interacting with wildlife and the public, we find that the easiest way, the best way to get the public excited about conservation is to have a positive experience with animals, right?
Yeah.
Now, zoos, when they're done really well, and Symbio is a great example of that, where you've got good keepers that are willing to spend time with the public, willing to spend time with the kids, willing to do those interactivity type sessions. You have people that come there every day that it literally changes their life, right?
Yeah.
And if you give them a bad experience, it can turn them off wildlife conservation forever. But by giving them a good experience, the value that you provide is something that isn't necessarily easy to quantify, I suppose.
I think to the exhibits, because they have become so much better. Like, I can remember zoos when I was a kid, and that was a fucking long time ago. They have come a long way. You can see the animal in its natural habitat, so to speak.
Yeah, oh, yeah, for sure.
Instead of a cage.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the tricky thing is, there are certainly still places out there right around the world that are keeping animals in less than ideal conditions, and you know, they can call themselves a zoo, and the best zoos in the world can call themselves zoos. So there's no you know, the label is universal. It's not it's not restricted to places that are doing it well. So it's always going to be a constant battle. You know, while we still have that.
And even some old zoos too, right? That have been around for hundreds of years. are still amazing, right? Because they go through and they do updates and all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. We were at Frankfurt Zoo, and you walk into the herp house at Frankfurt Zoo, which is a combination aquarium and herp house, and then on the top of the aquarium up above is where your herp collection is. And you walk up there and there's like little signs around there saying the green lizards that are running around wild in here are okay. Please leave them. They haven't escaped their enclosures. They're Madagascan day geckos that literally run all over the place while you're there, right? In and out of the crocodile exhibits and things like that because of the way it's all set up.
But how many kids, though, have been jumping around trying to catch them for them to have to put signs up?
100%, right?
Yeah.
And there's quite a few, quite a few
adults.
Yeah, quite a few day geckos that are sitting around there with missing tails and stuff like that. So invariably it happens, right? But at the same time, it's these sort of interesting places that do change their exhibits, that do update their things and bring and modernize and go from the old stuff to the new stuff.
Was that the
Dog's asleep, sorry.
Was that the zoo where we went with Natasha and Hector?
No.
What was that zoo?
That was Olsen Zoo.
So at Olsen Zoo, dogs are very welcome in anywhere in Germany. We got the shock of our life. We got off the plane, walking through a shopping centre. There's like 50 dogs in the shopping centre, like in a shopping centre. Yeah, we were like, fuck. So the dogs were allowed to go to the zoo, and they have Natasha works with Andreas at Edition Chimera, and she took Hector to the zoo with us. So for I think it was €3.
Yeah, €3.
The dog gets admission plus a bag of feed.
Yeah.
But it was, what animal did he have a interaction with? Was it a hippo?
No, I can't remember what it was.
But she takes him. Natasha takes him all the time, and it was a deer or something. And this animal remembered the dog Hector and has come over to meet him and greet him. Hector's jumped up and they're nuzzling noses. And Scott and I were just standing there going, "You couldn't do this in Australia. This is amazing."
No way. Crazy.
Yeah. So, you've worked with some pretty incredible animals over the years. What would you say would be the most intelligent species you've worked with in the zoo system? Is it these things that are on the screen there, or is it something else?
It would be Komodos. They're they're hard to kind of compete with from an intelligence standpoint. It's so just to give a bit of context at the reptile park. When I first started there, the young pair, they were only 4 years old, 4 or 5 years old. And the female was still quite small, maybe a bit bigger than a male lace monitor. So as far as Komodos go, still a relatively young, small lizard. And I worked with those two right up until I left. Those lizards are now in their teens, so they're quite sizable, more or less full grown adult Komodos. But a few years ago, in 2022, we actually managed to successfully breed that species for the first time ever in an Australian zoo, which was a pretty massive thing, for us and for the species within the region. And we hatched out 3 little Komodos. So yeah, at one point I was working with five individual Komodos, which not many people can say that they have done within their career. They're a pretty special lizard, and yeah, to have kind of raised those two adults more or less, and then have those go on and reproduce themselves was pretty rewarding. And they are highly intelligent. When they're young, you could compare them to some of our Australian varanids, but as they age and mature a bit, they just get pretty mellow and just they're very calculated, and they're constantly thinking. They're one of the few reptiles that I could say is actively looking at you and just kind of working out what's going on, what's food, what's not. Like for example, the adult female, just randomly one day, instead of calling her name, I just did like a short, sharp whistle, and over time, she just kind of associated that with me wanting her attention and wanting her to come over to me. So all I had to do was walk in and do a quick whistle, and she could be digging or she could be drinking or whatever it was, and she would just immediately stop and just walk straight over to me, which was pretty cool. The big male, he would, obviously loved his food, as any veranid does, but they're not like a lot of other veranids where they would go into an absolute feeding frenzy. Dan and I always used to say that you could take a rabbit and probably rub it all over your hand, and then hold your hand and the rabbit next to each other in front of the lizards, and they would sniff your hand, the rabbit, eat it, but they wouldn't, go into that mental feeding frenzy and just start biting everything because they can smell food. They were just kind of that next level up from most reptiles. And then as far as, we also got to work with a very intelligent snake species, which is a king cobra. I got to work with a few different individual king cobras during my time at Reptile Park, and they're highly, highly intelligent as well. You can see, when they're looking at you, they're working out what's going on.
You were working with the Southern Kings, weren't you? You had Bungaris, yeah?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So the big male, who's unfortunately passed now, but he was quite an old snake. He came. No, he was wild caught in Java in the early 2000s. So he was wild caught and then exported to the US. And then from the US, he came back to Australia and was at the park from 2006 onwards, or maybe it was 2004. Either way, he'd been at the reptile park for 17 or 18 years by the time I was working with him, and he was probably the best part of maybe 3.8, maybe nudging on 4 meters. So he was a big awesome. Snake, and not not quiet either. Like if you were going to get bitten by a king cobra, it was probably going to be that one. I remember one time I was feeding him, and I had a rat at the end of a pair of tongs, just like snake handling tongs, and he just completely missed the rat and grabbed the tongs and was just chewing on them, and just like, I was like, God, I'm glad that is not my hand, because a snake that size with the amount of power they've got behind them, and they're not a snake that typically grabs and lets go of things. They grab and just bulldog their way down down that animal, whether it's another snake or a monitor lizard, and never a snake you want to be on the receiving end of, that's for sure. And we had 40 vials of anti-venom at the park at any one time, plus all of the years of expired anti-venom. So we probably had 200 plus vials of king cobra anti-venom sitting on site at any one time, in the event of a bite. Thankfully, that never occurred.
Totally PC question. What's the dumbest animal you've ever worked with?
Besides people.
Yeah. Definitely one of the dumbest reptiles out there would have to be American alligators.
What were you going to say? I thought you were going to say the tuataras. I remember when we rocked up to see you, and you're like, you got to see this, and then you're like, they're so dumb.
They are a little bit dumb. Yeah, tuatara. Yeah, there's probably not much going on behind those eyes, but you got to give them a break though. They're 260 million years plus old. But
Johnny, oh my God.
American alligators. I hear people in the States, talk about training them, and I mean, I'm sure if you put the work into them, that you might be able to get one that's pretty responsive and perhaps gives off a bit of intelligence. But we had a very large number of alligators at the park, and they just, some of them, you'd go in to feed them, and you'd throw a bit of food down into into the lagoon, and you'd have 20 or 30 gators coming up for food at any one time. So it was a bit hard to accurately get food into all their mouths. So inevitably you'd end up with a bit of pig or something sitting on top of one of their heads, and they'd just be like floating in the water, like, where is it? Like, and just moving their head around, like can't work out where this food is. And you imagine a salty in the same situation. They're just they're onto it immediately. There's just none of that. Whereas a gator is they're basically like a big kind of lumbering, gentle giant of the crocodilian world. I still love them. They're pretty incredible species, but they're certainly nothing compared to our crocs or many other species of crocodilian for that matter.
Sorry, the dog's joining
in. Dumb animals that are joining in.
Don't call my dog dumb. What's an underrated species, do you think, in your opinion?
An underrated species. I mean, one thing, and I think it just comes down to them, being a pretty successful invasive species throughout the world, and 2, very common in the pet trade overseas. Green iguanas. I mean, I don't think people give green iguanas enough credit. Everyone kind of rubbishes them, but like when you see a big, impressive, like healthy, wild type male green iguana, it's one of the most beautiful, like spectacular reptiles in the world. So underrated, certainly. And I've worked with a few green iguanas over the years as well. And then another one would maybe be rhinoceros iguanas. I guess because there is certainly some far more spectacular species of cyclura than rhino iguanas. But I really like them. I think they're a cool looking lizard, and they've got big personalities. And I think again, just because they're probably the most common of the cyclura out there, they just kind of get pushed to the side when you compare them to something like a Lewisii or a colii or something. But they're a cool lizard, and we don't have any other species of cyclura in Australia to keep anyway. So cornuda's all we've got access to. So we kind of got to love them.
They're a cool lizard though. Like they are a very cool lizard. They may not be the most pretty thing like some of those others out there, but certainly cornuda are a beautiful animal to work with anyway. I love that whole genus. The other underrated one that comes to mind for me is things like red bellies. They're such a absolutely snake, but I mean, you talk to someone from outside of Australia about a red-bellied black snake, and they just light up, And I mean, if beautiful to work with, they're a beautiful animal themselves, and quiet and just nice.
They're one of our most stunning snakes, and if they were as rare as something like an Ompellia or a Collette's or something, like they would be so sought after. Like they would be one of the pinnacles of Australian herping. But because they're pretty much common everywhere they occur, they just kind of get pushed to the side. But they are a stunning snake. Very cool.
You've been on TV a few times. Do you like getting on the telly, or is that something that you've got to do for work?
That look.
I know you don't like it quite as much as Dan Rumsey, of course. But,
Dan loves it. Any excuse to get on the telly, and Dan's there. It's definitely something we kind of had to do, and I get it from an exposure and kind of an advocacy perspective. Like you can reach a lot of people when you're on morning telly, and I honestly didn't mind. Like I don't do any of it really these days, but I did a lot of it for a while there, and I honestly didn't mind the segment itself. But if you're going down to do something like Sunrise or the Today Show or something, for that minute 30 seconds that you're on live with the host, there's probably 3 or 4 hours of prep before that. Like if you're going on TV at 8 o'clock, they want you in the studio at 6:30. So that means you're leaving the Central Coast to drive to Sydney at 5 o'clock, which means you're leaving home at 4 o'clock. Like it was just huge mornings for that 90 seconds of exposure that you got from it. But it was always good when we did stuff from the park, like when we did live crosses and that, and you could just, incorporate it as part of your normal work day and you didn't have to go anywhere. They were the best ones. But when you actually had to go in and do telly at night or early morning, it was a bit of a punish sometimes, but it was all part of it. And we did some pretty crazy things on telly over the years. Like I remember taking stuff like, Dan took one of the big Galapagos tortoises to the Today Show once, and we took a Komodo down, I think, and we were milking like big 8-foot Darwin mulgars on live telly, and there's a lot of stuff that could have gone wrong over the years, but thankfully nothing too crazy ever did.
It was a good fun working with Stefanovic and all that sort of stuff. Is he a bit of a larrikin off camera?
Yeah, no, all those hosts are good. Obviously, they've kind of got to have the personality behind them to be in the roles that they're in. And some of them were sometimes a bit over the top. Like, they'd kind of amp up how afraid they were of snakes or spiders or something just to make a good bit of telly. But I do actually remember a story. It was long before our time, thankfully. I think this was maybe in the early 2000s, and someone had taken a funnel web down to one of these shows, and they were there to talk about how important funnel webs are for antivenom production, and we need funnel webs and the whole spiel. And then I think the host may have actually taken their shoe off and smashed the spider on live telly.
Wow.
I'm not sure how I would have reacted in that circumstance. But you would have just had to have made a joke like, "Oh, well, one less now," and just got on with it. But there was definitely
if you had the wrong spider keeper at the time for that one, they would have lost their shit.
I would have though. Like, why invite a spider person down if that is a reaction that could happen?
Yeah. And we definitely had times where, we'd get a snake out or something and the host is like throwing themselves over the back of the couch and like just it's sensationalized media just like anything is. But it was it was a bit of fun.
What was the funniest thing you remember from doing TV?
Funniest thing.
Or even a big whoopsie.
I don't think I had any whoopsies, thankfully, but I definitely do remember at one point I must have had 3 or 4 different reptile species down with me to go on air with, and they were all stacked up in crates, just kind of in the studio, ready to go on. And I was kind of standing nearby, and I think I was chatting to one of the hosts, and one of the cameramen or something, I think, had no idea what was in the boxes and was just kind of like leaning up on him. And then he saw me and saw my uniform, saw where I was from, saw the boxes, and just kind of like put everything together in a few seconds and just kind of like freaked out that he'd just been leaning on these boxes that probably had a mulga and an alligator and whatever else in it. So.
Did you used to get nervous before going on?
Not particularly. I think if you can deliver a public presentation to the public, which we did day in, day out, multiple times over, usually most days, you can talk on TV, and you find that so often. Like you throw most zookeepers on even live telly, and they handle themselves pretty well, just because I think you have the ability to talk pretty well and put words together in a sentence pretty nicely, just from talking to the public about these animals for so long. And it also goes back to people being able to talk about what they're passionate about easily. Like if I had to get on there and talk about something completely random, it might be a bit of a different story, but you're on there talking about snakes and lizards that have been your lifelong obsession, so it certainly makes it a bit easier.
Have you ever been thrown off mid-talk by anything?
Oh, yes, definitely. There's been a few things I've seen whilst doing a talk, and often you just kind of try to move on and ignore it, or turn the other way. But one thing I certainly remember is there was a little kid in a show once. He was so we used to do our shows at the reptile park in a pit. So you basically had maybe a 1,200 high wall around the whole pit, and you'd have people that would line the edges of the pit. And I'm not sure if this parent just didn't want to lose their place, or what the go was, or whether they did this on a regular basis, but their kid needed to go to the toilet, and they just kind of held them off to the side, kept watching the show, and there's people all around, and this kid's just there doing his thing mid-show, and I kind of looked over and then took a double take, and it was oh, that's actually happening right now, okay, and just kind of tried to move on. But obviously it was extremely distracting for everyone in the crowd, because of course no one's then watching you or your show, they're watching this kid take a leak off in the corner. So that was certainly something that threw me a bit. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to get to bloody the next bit.
Oh.
That works. So you've worked on backgrounds, right? You're doing backgrounds and other bits and pieces now. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How did you get started? And, they're certainly bloody amazing looking things. Where did this come from? Was this something that you started in some of the parks and just took it out of that, took that from that, and then turned it into a business, haven't you?
Yeah, it's well, thank you firstly for those kind words. I've always been thank you.
No, honestly, you could think you were looking at something real. They are phenomenal. You've done such a good job.
I appreciate that. I've always been very artistic. I used to draw a lot when I was young. Obviously most of my drawings were of reptiles. I remember doing a pretty detailed illustration once when I was probably 12 or 13 of a spectacled cobra. I did drawings of crocodilians and stuff with heaps of detail, never any color in them. It was always just kind of black and white graphite kind of illustrations. But I wish I kind of had stuck with it, because I probably would have been a pretty good drawer at this point, but I kind of gave it all away and it was too distracted by herping there for a while. But then from working in zoos, I obviously most zoos are full of artificial rocks and trees and logs and things like that, just because most zoos want to present their animals in naturalistic environments, and that's a big part of it is creating these naturalistic ponds and rock features and trees and things like that. And it's not always possible, particularly in a reptile house situation, to get big sections of natural rock in there. There's weight considerations. There's obviously pretty limited space in a lot of herp exhibits. So it just has made sense for decades to construct a lot of things in place artificially. And so I saw this being done, and yeah, one day I just thought, I'm going to have a stab at this. I'd never mixed a batch of concrete or mortar or anything in my life, so it was kind of a completely new medium for me. But I just kind of started to make a few small things. I always say, that first ever rock that I made, it looked more like a chocolate cake than a rock. It was very circular and very oddly painted, and it was a pretty hideous little thing at the end of it. But it was the start, and I just kind of over the years got pretty good at working with the materials and working out all the little tricks and techniques of the trade. And it eventually got to the point where I was doing a fair bit at Reptile Park, even just off display. I was trying to put backgrounds in things that didn't necessarily need backgrounds, but we were doing behind the scenes tours, and I mostly just wanted to upskill myself, and so I was doing backgrounds in things. And I did a background in a dart frog tank once, and one of the girls that was working at the park with me just said, you could actually probably do this for money. Like, people would pay you to do this. And so I was like, oh, maybe I am good enough to kind of pursue that side of things, because there wasn't a whole lot of people out there doing it, especially people that had the skills, but also had the herp knowledge, as kind of a combination. And so, I just kind of started to pick up a few jobs here and there, and kind of started to take it a bit more seriously, and got myself, kind of a little side gig set up. And to this day, I've been doing it properly, I guess, you could say, a few years now, and I've probably worked at a dozen different zoos and wildlife parks, and then also done a whole host of things for private keepers as well, like that little ficus stump there. I knocked that up for Kai Gould, who I know you guys know pretty well, and I work with at Symbio. So he keeps there he is. So he keeps a lot at home, and something that he keeps are Saltuarius, the leaf-tailed geckos, and so that that little stump there's kind of made a nice little feature in one of his tanks, and he comes into work most days and tells me that they were sitting in ambush on the side of the trunk there, and it's pretty cool.
It looks, as somebody that's seen lots of Saltuarius in the wild, it really does look like you've cut a fig off and stuck it in an enclosure for sure.
Yeah.
There, like, how do you go about, without going into the exact detail of it, because obviously there's a little bit of secretiveness, I suppose, to some of the techniques. But how did you come up with? Are you using like an imprint onto the wet concrete to sort of give you those striations, or are you doing that individually by hand on all of them?
Yeah, so I don't do any stamps or kind of impression type.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen that done on rock and trees plenty of times. But essentially the way that I do those ficus kind of buttress roots is, it's simpler than it probably looks. You can just kind of have to find the right brush that's got the right kind of style bristles that you need. And when the mud is still quite and when I say mud, I'm talking about a mortar mix that you make up to do this kind of thing, and it's quite a sticky mix, and it goes on not wet to where it's obviously you don't want it to fall back off whatever you're making, but it's got a lot of moisture in it, and so it takes those kind of brush strokes quite nicely in the beginning before it starts to set up. And you just, obviously it comes down to a bit of technique and a bit of practice as well. You kind of get pretty good at knowing about how things are gonna look when you've done them and things like that. So and I've done that background there I did for a private gecko keeper. I think he might have even been putting Saltuarius in that one as well. But that's a bit more of a rock, whole three-sided background there with the rock, and he's gone through at the end and put some perches in. But I do like doing the rock, but the trees are a lot more challenging, I find. So I'm really getting a kick out of kind of figuring out how to do those trees, because I think I've got the rock kind of pretty well dialed in now. In saying that, there is always so much room for improvement. Like, you look at some of the guys, especially in the States and Europe, that have been doing, professional rock work in zoos and theme parks and that for, 30, 40 years. Their work is literally indistinguishable from real rock. Like, they are just phenomenal. And I certainly think I'm still a long way from that kind of level.
You're your own worst critic, though. They are phenomenal.
Yeah, always. But yeah, like some of the stuff I see coming out of the the states, like the artificial lichens and mosses and just the detail and the realism and the paint jobs as well, because that's one thing that you've got to carve the rock to look realistic, but then you've got to paint it to look realistic as well. And if you paint it incorrectly, it'll look fake no matter how nice your carving is. So it's one of those things you've kind of got to have lots of independent skills running simultaneously. And the painting, I think, is actually probably one of the hardest things. I think the difference between a good-looking artificial rock and like a really, really good-looking artificial rock is all in the paint and the fine details at the end.
So is this what stage we're looking at here? Is it you're coming up to doing some airbrush work and some painting work on this, and that's why the glass is obviously masked out?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so that was kind of a big walk-in, like an arid lizard exhibit, actually for a private keeper down in Vic, which was pretty cool to see. Like that enclosure was 2,400 deep, may have even been 3 meters deep. It was a huge, big enclosure that he'd had built in his house. And I'm just going through at this stage and painting up everything. So that's why the glass is masked up there. And essentially what I'm doing is using a combination of like air, as you said there, but also even just the very simple like pump spray bottles you can get from Bunnings. You pump air into them. Everyone uses them to mist down their herp exhibits, but you can also pump diluted paint through them and get that very, very fine mist going on and create some really nice kind of speckling effects with that, just like you'd see on some real rock. Obviously you got to be mindful of what colors you're using and making sure that you're blending your colors nicely, because no rock is just one hard solid color. It's always got lots of variation in it. I mean, even a rock that looks like it might just be gray from a distance, you get up in it and it's got tiny flecks of peach and white and black and all those colors in unison are what give it a realistic appearance. Whereas if you're painting a rock, you've got the choice to paint it solid gray if you want to, but it's not going to look real. You've got to mirror the wild. And this picture you've got up here now. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, we speak about this for herp enclosures and stuff like that, but obviously you don't restrict yourself to herp enclosures. You do other things as well. When you're doing your initial design or your initial quoting thing, is that one of the most important parts? Is actually consideration as to what species is going into it. I imagine with amphibians, your finish is really important to make sure that it's sealed properly, that when it gets wet, it doesn't leach out any lime or anything like that could have an adverse effect on amphibians. If you were using something that was a styrofoam base that you were then covering, you had to make sure it was thick enough that the claws of the animals aren't going to tear off big chunks of it, etc., etc. Can you sort of talk to some of those considerations that you might have?
Yeah, definitely. I guess doing rock work on a more kind of professional level, I guess you could say, like you would see in zoos and theme parks and things like that. It's very different to how the average herp keeper would construct a background in an exoterra, for example. I mean, we've all seen backgrounds done with foam and grout and tile pointing and all of those kind of methods, and I've done all of that in the past as well when I was first starting out. But when you're talking about things that have to sit outdoors 24/7 in the full sun and cop the animals being oftentimes all over them all the time, it's kind of the next step up. So typically any kind of framework or base that I use will have a good 3 to 4 inches sometimes of material on top of it. So that's a very, very solid base that nothing's ever going to be able to kind of penetrate and get back to that initial base that you use, whether it's foam or the majority of what I use these days is steel and mesh. So you're actually bending steel and creating your shapes and your forms, and then you're meshing that, and then you're applying your mix onto that. So you essentially end up with a big hollow structure that is completely hollowed out internally, but it's got a good casing of several inches of mortar right around the outside of it. So it's very solid, very very secure. Oftentimes it's also fixed into a concrete slab or something like that, so nothing can get under it, nothing can get up inside it. It's completely enclosed and encapsulated, and that particularly becomes important when you're talking about herps for sure, but also mammals. Like this photo you've got up here was my most recent job. I only finished this one just a week ago exactly, and that was down in Victoria at the Royal Children's Hospital right in the middle of the city, and they've actually got a group of meerkats at the hospital for the kids to see when they're in there, which is a really nice thing. And those meerkats, they obviously belong to Melbourne Zoo, but they've got this exhibit there, and they wanted a little heated cave for them coming into winter. Obviously, you're living in the in the deserts of southern Africa. It's a little bit different to Melbourne in the middle of winter. So we wanted to kind of build a little heated cave, and they gave me pretty much full creative license here to kind of build what I wanted to. The only thing that they had was the heater. They had the heater, so we had to work around that, and obviously the amount of heat that was going to be putting out, which kind of governed the height of the whole thing quite a bit. So it did end up being reasonably tall. It was about 1,500 tall all up, and that meant that the meerkats would be sitting about 800 or so below the heater, just to allow for the power of it.
So
but it came up really
a radiant heat panel or something in that, are they? Or is
basically like a mini infrared patio heater up inside there. And so that whole thing's also got it's got conduit running up through it for power. So there's a power supply up in the top of it, which is all concealed behind a screen top. The heater's up in the top of it, and obviously you want none of that to be visible. You want the edges of the cave itself not to just kind of look like a flat edge. So you have to get creative with it and try and make what is kind of a bit of an odd looking structure look as natural as it possibly can. But I think obviously concealing it all with some artificial rock like that, it certainly helps to kind of blend it in, blend what is kind of an unnatural looking thing as best as you possibly can.
So, other meerkats, have they moved in? Have they tested it out?
I don't think they've quite moved back just yet. They had some other stuff that they wanted to do to the exhibit while it was empty, just some re-landscaping and things like that. But I have asked them to send me some photos as soon as they're back in, because that's the other thing. Like I never get to see the animals in a lot of these things that I build. So I always like to receive photos from people, a month or two down the line when the animal's back in and it's actually utilizing the the thing that you've made for it. That's kind of the best part of it.
Is it going to be interactive, or is it just an exhibit?
It's just an exhibit, but it's a very well presented exhibit. It's glass on pretty much all sides, so you can pretty much see the meerkats wherever they are. And obviously they're pretty busy little things, meerkats. So I'm sure they'll be pretty easy to spot in there. And that rock feature there is only about 2 meters away from one of the viewing windows, so you can literally look straight into it. And we kind of made it too so that it was nice and easy for even a small child to look into. It's not like elevated or anything. It's pretty much at ground level.
So it must be something. It must be something that's you're pretty proud of. considering the amount of kids and stuff like that are going to, they're probably having a pretty rough day, to be fair, being at the hospital, and now they're getting to interact in a positive environment with some pretty interesting animals.
Yeah, definitely, and that's all part of it too. Like, I mean, you get to, I get to walk around work at Symbio and see, see kind of my rock work all over the place now. I've done a fair bit of it at Symbio now, and it's always good when you walk past and you see a wombat drinking out of a bowl that you made, and you see something utilizing a rock that you built. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Do you find it relaxing, like the creative outlet? Do you find that relaxing, or is this like part of your job now?
No, I still really enjoy it, and I find it relaxing. At least certain parts of it. It's
when it's going right.
especially when everything's in your favor and the weather's nice. When I don't find it relaxing is when there's rain on the way, or it's raining and you've just got a whole bunch of wet mortar sitting there, and you're trying to build something under a tarp, and that's when it's not relaxing. But when everything's in line and it's going well, I still thoroughly enjoy it. I actually do. I do really like working indoors because you can obviously control everything. Like you can speed up or you can slow down how fast everything's setting up. Because obviously, I've done this on 40+ degree days when you've got probably maybe half an hour to an hour from it coming out of the mixer to being almost rock hard. So you're racing the clock, and that's when it's not enjoyable. But when you can kind of control everything, and you don't have to worry about rain or sun, because that's the other thing. If you're doing this and you've got the sun beating down overhead, everything's setting up quicker than it should be, and that's when you can start to run into issues with things wanting to start to crack, because it's just drying faster than it should be, and you always want to avoid that. A structural crack is different to a crack that you're putting in for aesthetic purposes. So you obviously want to make sure that you're controlling all of that. And then when you're painting,
you can use expansion joints and stuff like that for those as well.
You can, yeah, definitely. And it's a lot of those standard practice.
Oh, sorry, can you guys hear me at all?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Just my my headphones just died, so I'm just going to switch over to straight in the laptop. Obviously when you're doing this, you're essentially building basically just a fancy vertically oriented concrete slab. Like a lot of the same things apply. You've got to have reinforcement so that you don't have cracking. You've got to be conscious of the weather and how you're finishing things, and you can obviously do things a little bit differently to if you were the way that you would finish a standard concrete slab. You can get a bit more creative with it. But I mean, you've got to apply a lot of the same practices in terms of structure and reinforcement, or it'll just fall apart. There's tons of examples online of rockwork projects that are sometimes only 5 or 6 years old, and they're falling apart because they're not done right. And one of the big things is water getting up and inside it. And there's a lot of ways you can avoid that by properly waterproofing things and using sealants. And the way that you do things that are going to sit underwater is very different to how you do things that are just not sitting underwater. So there's lots of considerations, but if you do it well, it should last a very, very long time. I think the mock rock that's at Taronga in their giraffe exhibit, their giraffe barn, it's like heritage listed. It's like 80 or 90 years old.
Oh wow!
And it's still going strong, and it was obviously built well when they did it.
Well, it's like some examples of some of those sort of fake rocks and stuff like that. If you've ever been to Riversley up in northwest Queensland, the toilet block at Riversley there was built by Gunther Schmieder.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
mad. That's cool.
Right, and he did that in the 70s. Right,
Yeah,
so
it's still there.
that's 50 years it's been sitting
Yeah.
out in northwest Queensland, looking like a cavey sort of almost looks like a weird overgrown termite mound / cave thing that he's done there.
But to walk past it, you'd think it was.
But it blends into into the environment,
And that's the other thing. That's the other thing too. Almost the longer it sits there, the more natural it becomes, because it does start to, grow its own moss and lichens, and it'll get dirty, and water will stain it, just like a real rock will over time. So some of the best looking fake rock that I've seen is stuff that is 20 to 30 years old and is covered in moss and lichens, and some places you will go through and clean that stuff off, and it's almost criminal. Like it's perfect. That's the way it should be.
Had it right. Leave it alone.
Yeah, exactly. I have done a few things, especially frog exhibits and things like that, where once you've finished everything, you'll go through with some Java moss and just kind of spread it around, and the surface is more than rough enough for that stuff to start to take off and start to cover. And it might sound a bit funny wanting the work that you've put a lot of effort into to get covered in moss, but that's when it looks at its absolute best. So.
But that's where you're getting like pieces of the rock that are sticking through through that mossy environment, which really does make it look much more normal.
Yeah, and you can do so much in the kind of initial planning design phase as well. Like you can incorporate planters into it and little pockets where you could stick bromeliads or bird's nest ferns or anything like that to kind of make it look a lot more natural, like almost instantly, just by popping a few plants on.
Yeah.
You mentioned the States earlier. Where else have you been?
I would say I'm reasonably well traveled. I've never done Europe. I'd definitely like to get over there. I have done a fair bit in Asia. A lot of it was when I was a fair bit younger and probably didn't know as much around herping as what I do now. I probably would have done a lot more, seen a lot more if I had known a bit more. But I did Thailand, and I've done Vietnam as well. And then I've done 2 trips now to Singapore. The last trip I did to Singapore was only 2 years ago. And that was a great trip. That was quite herp focused, and obviously did a fair few of the zoos over there now too, because for such a small country, they've got about 5 different zoos there, so you can certainly fill your time there pretty easily as a wildlife enthusiast. And plus they've got some other cool things as well, primates and pangolins and squirrels and all this stuff that's pretty foreign to us as Australians. But obviously, you go over there for the snakes, and I saw some pretty cool snakes. Wagglers are quite common there. They're probably the most common snake that you see when you're out at night. But you see, Dendrolaphus sleeping in the trees, and oriental whip snakes, Prasina. They're quite common of a night. You'll see them just sleeping in the foliage. And,
how often do you see Dendrolaphus over here asleep? Because that's
the thing, isn't it?
We were over in Indo, we saw quite a few pictus and stuff like that curled up, sitting in the axils of palms and in ferns and stuff like that as you're walking through, and you're like, oh yeah, Dendrolaphus and this that. It's like in all of the years that I've been herping in Queensland, I've only ever found one sleeping Dendrolaphus.
Yeah,
you do it. You go to Indo and you see them all the time.
Well, it's almost the kind of go-to method to target Dendrolaphus in Asia is just a spotlight for them at sleeping at night. Because I mean, obviously they're so bloody fast during the day, and and yeah, I'm the same. Like, you know, you think about the amount of time that you've spent walking through suitable habitat at nighttime in in Australia, and I've never seen a sleeping tree snake. Whether it be a common or a northern. So it's it's interesting, and yeah, it seems to be quite commonplace throughout much of Southeast Asia to see Dendrolaphus in trees at night. And we got a retic as well on that last trip, which was cool. Because although they're a common snake, they're one I hadn't seen yet, and they're just like an iconic, super famous snake that you kind of just have to see at some point. Who wouldn't want to see the world's longest snake? So, and I saw
we saw a retic when we were in Bali, and we were driving along. We had the driver with us, and I would just yell out, "Stop!" And he goes, "What for?" And I've just jumped out, and I've looked across into a paddock, and all I saw was just the pattern of a retic initially. And then I realised what had happened. It actually put a timber stake through it.
And they'd only just done it too. It hadn't been done too long.
And the poor thing, it was obviously dead at that point, but it was just like all the blood was still bright red, right? So it wasn't long for this thing. And it's just like,
it's hard though, because of their culture. You need to control your face. It's what they do to keep, you know what I mean? Like, you're horrified, but you sort of can't let it show.
Yeah, and it varies so much country to country too. Like Singapore is, wildlife is very heavily protected, and there's no form of hunting or harvesting or anything in Singapore. But I saw the same thing in Malaysia. I went to Langkawi Island quite a few years ago, probably 10 years ago now, and very same thing. Had seen a retic that had just been killed. It was out, obviously, just like basking in the early morning. And it must have just been on the side of the road or something, and a guy had come along with a machete and just taken its head off. And it was a small snake, like it was probably only a 4-foot retic, but I was like, far out. Like that's a horrible way to see your first reticulated python. But this one Matt and I got in Singapore was probably like 3.5 meters. So like not a monster, but like big enough to really do some damage if you wanted to. And
you don't want to chew it on you, that's for sure.
No, and like big enough that it was kind of an impressive, an impressive enough retic to see.
So I know over the years, mate, you've dealt with some unicorns, and the snake up here on the screen that for a long time was a unicorn for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and it was so frustrating because, I mean, the snake we're talking about, for anyone that can't see, this is the spotted black snake, or Pseudechus guttatus, and I had done, I don't even know how many nights I've spent in their range over the years, probably 50 plus nights, where I could have potentially seen a spotted black snake, and because you get them all the way down into the Hunter in New South Wales, so they're not a snake that I even had to go that far for. And
they're pretty common around Scone and Muswellbrook and Aberdeen and stuff like that. Literally right just up the road from the park. So
and had just never could never come across one. I'd seen quite a few roadkills, mostly around kind of that like Glenmorgan, Erringibba area of the Brigalow. And some pretty nice ones too up that way, which is a bit of a shame. And I would just watch like person after person do their, get into herping, do their first brigalow trip, and see 4 spotted bucks. it was just so frustrating because they're not even, they're not a rare snake by any means. It wasn't, it's not like and so I decided this season I was going to have a pretty solid crack for them. I already had this little brigalow trip planned, which I ended up doing a few weeks ago, or about probably a bit over a month ago now. But it actually worked out that my wife and my son and I were up on the Gold Coast staying with my family. And I just got impatient and just one night just shot out to the kind of out to kind of the Darling Downs kind of area, and finally managed to get to that night, which was nice. And then I did this little trip up through kind of central northern New South Wales, up into the Brigalow, just on a weekend. So it was a big trip and a lot of kilometers to do in for 2 nights of herping, but it was well worth it, because I did manage to not only see a couple more spotted black snakes. I've now seen 4 this season, but I managed to tick off another much more significant nemesis of mine, which was a Woma python, which if I had to point the finger at a species I've probably spent more time targeting than anything else, I would say it's Womas. I've been to Yalara probably.
Woma. Like all the ones I've seen in the scrub are feral.
Well, a lot of those big.
It's definitely got the telltale bearded dragon bites on the back, though, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. It definitely had a few good scars on it, but I mean, it was. I didn't care. It was a big, beautiful.
You get to that point, hey?
But I've targeted Womas. I think I've done 5 or 6 trips to Yalara now. I've herped Shark Bay. I've herped a few other areas that they occur in WA a bit further north. I've done the Brigalow. I don't even know how many times. I've done up and down the Northern Territory. Between Tea Tree and Tennant Creek and the Barkley and Aileron and all these places where they certainly show up. Just so many times. Spent a week straight in the Tanami targeting them, and just couldn't. I couldn't even for a long time. I couldn't even get a roadkill, and then finally the other week. We were up just kind of east of St. George, and finally got that pretty big specimen. And seeing that snake stretched out on the road, it just felt like more of a relief than anything. I was just like, oh, finally, it's happened. It's not going to be a unicorn for the next 30 years.
So what is it now? What's your next species that you desperately want to see?
Oh, there's a few. I mean, there's a lot of species I haven't even tried for, so I can't really call them like a unicorn or a nemesis. But one of the lizards I most want to see in the country would definitely be Ajura muramanu over in the limestone, over in the Oscar Range over there in WA. I love Ajura, and I've seen most of them now, although it seems like there's a new bloody one described every year that I've got to go and tick off.
There's a few more coming.
Oh, so. I know. And yeah, it feels like every time I get
at least the Eastern Australian ones, so they're not so bad.
Yeah.
So.
There was one point where I think I only had 2 species left to see, and it's kind of got away on me a bit now. But I did the Kimberley. And I got Felicipoda and Gracilis and that up there, but just never, unfortunately, made it down to target Muramanu. And they look like just a spectacular gecko. So I'd really, really love to see them. There's a few snakes I'd really like to see. I have seen Demansia quaesator in northwest Queensland a couple of times. Just never got hands on one, which is just a bit of a thorn in the side for me. Got really close to one a couple of years ago. End of 2022, I did did a trip up to Isa and was walking around some of the rocky country south of town looking for, hosmers and Gleba palmer and that kind of thing. And just in mid-morning just saw a Quasar active, and I was on foot. It wasn't even like I had to stop a vehicle, get out of a vehicle. I just like completely fumbled it and it got into some rocks, and I was just killing myself for the next couple of days over that. Because I've seen 3 now. I've seen two on the road, which, fair enough. Like they were gone in a flash. Like before I even got out of the car, they were just gone. But this one I probably had a pretty decent crack at getting and just completely missed it. So they're one I'd really like to see.
It took me a long time to get a Rimacola like that, because you see a Rimacola, and as soon as you pull the car up, you see them and they just shoot. And as soon as they shoot into that Mitchell grass, you're just like,
you've got it. If you get a Rimacola in the middle of the road, like from what I found, like you just have to sprint hard at them, and maybe one in every few you might get. Like they're such a hard snake. Whip snakes in general are hard, tricky snakes to get photos of, or at least get the opportunity to take photos of. And then Bredli is another one. Like I said before, I've been to Central Australia probably half a dozen times now, and still haven't seen a Bredli. And at this point, I've only got 2 Australian pythons left to see. So Bredli and Imbricata. I haven't spent a lot of time in the southwest, so I can't really say that Imbricata, I've only ever really had a crack for them on one trip. So I'm sure I'll get them pretty easily if I spend enough time over there. But Bredli are one that I've certainly had a pretty solid crack at. And I mean, the last few times I've been to Alice, I've hardly even targeted anything else. Like I haven't really done any road cruising. I've kind of seen most of what's out there that you can clean up on the roads. I had a really, really productive trip out there in 2017 after they just had a lot of rain, and practically saw most herps in Alice, aside from a bloody Bredli. So they're one that I definitely need to get back and try and tick off, because I would love to. I'd love to complete the Aussie pythons at some point in the next few years. Roughies, and I got a Ruffy, and I've seen an Ompelli as well. Obviously green pythons. It's a pretty crazy world sometimes. You tell people you've seen an Ompelli before you've seen an Imbricata. So it's a bit funny the way it all works.
Have you injured yourself in the scrub?
Yes, I have actually. I had a pretty bad time out at Kubapedi a few years ago. Thankfully, it wasn't taipan related, although we were looking for taipans at the time. It was more vehicle related. I was cruising, like I was doing what a lot of people do when they're cruising black soil. My mate was driving, and I was standing on the side of the car, just kind of on the sideboard, looking out over the plains, looking for snakes and lizards and whatnot. And I think he might have been going a bit quick, or something happened. I don't think I'd seen a reptile, but I motioned for him to just like slow down a bit. And I think he thought that I was saying that I'd seen a taipan, and so he slammed on the brakes pretty hard, and I flew off the car while we were probably still doing maybe 40 or 50k an hour. And the roads out there are, they're pretty good. They're mostly just like dirt and gravel, but just my luck, my head, like I hit the road pretty hard, and I skid along my back on the gravel, but then my head just happened to find the only kind of decent sized rock that was on the road for kilometers, and I ended up with a good few stitches in the back of my head, completely split my head open. There was blood, pouring out everywhere. So it was just towel on the back of the head, back into town to the medical center. And the whole time while we were getting fixed up, I was just thinking, oh man, now's such a good time to be looking for Taifans.
That's what surgical is for, mate.
Oh, I reckon I would have given it a crack, but it was probably a little bit too severe for a patch job. But the other kind of hairy situation or significant one that I can remember was up in the Kimberley. And I mean, that Northwest Kimberley is remote. You know, we weren't at Mitchell Plateau. We were over near Prince Regent National Park. So there's practically no one out there. We didn't see another person that wasn't part of our group for a week. So it's remote. And I was off one night looking for Felicipoda. I hadn't seen them at this point. And the other guys that I was with were pretty into their mammals. So I think they were maybe looking for golden bandicoot, or one of the other obscure mammals that's up there. And so I was on my own, and I was walking around the escarpment. And the way that this escarpment was, it basically had like a plateau at the top, and then lots of deep kind of crevices that were maybe like 30 to 50 centimeters wide, just going straight down into the rock. And I shined a Felicipoda down in one of these crevices. I could see it maybe 10 or 12 feet down on the side of the rock. And I don't know why I thought I could accomplish this, but I thought that I might be able to kind of shimmy down and get to it. And I kind of got down into the crevice fine, and there was a few footholes and handholds and that. And so I was doing okay, but it just kind of got narrower and narrower and narrower until the point where I was kind of like, I could feel the rock compressing in on me. And it was to the point where I was like, I can't really go any further because I'm going to get wedged. But then I also couldn't really get back up. And so I was like, oh, shit, I'm in a bit of a spot here. And like by this point, the rocks, I've probably got like only a few centimeters between like my chest and the rock and my back and the rock. So I'm like pretty stuck. And so I just had to kind of compose myself because I could feel myself starting to panic a bit. Like I was by myself. There was no one around. Like they were nowhere near me. I couldn't just call out and ask for a hand out of this crevice. I was getting myself out, or I was going to be in some serious strife. And yeah, thankfully managed to kind of compose myself and managed to kind of shimmy and scramble back up. Unfortunately lost the gecko, but I was, by that point, I wasn't thinking too much about the Felicipoda. It was more about survival as opposed to photographing that gecko.
Has your mum heard this story, or is this the first time she's going to hear it?
I don't think she has. I don't think Brody's heard this story either.
You're in trouble.
Some stories are best left untold.
Yep.
But the thing is, right, is you invariably you have some little misses, right? Like I remember looking for carby one time, and I put my hand on a branch that was probably about that round, right? So it was about 6 inches round. But you know, solid, when look, I'm a bigger fella, right? But at the end of the day, right, a 6-inch branch is gonna hold me, right? It was a paper. It had just been eaten to hell by beetles inside. And so when I put my hand on it, I just went straight through, right?
Yeah.
Down I go the side of this waterfall that went down about 3 meters. And I just happened to land. And where this is, it's about 8 or so kilometers from where you park the car. And it's like, so down this little waterfall I go, and then land in a big pile of really soft leaf litter, right? Just to the side with some really jagged rocks. And I was like, well, I'm glad I fell where I fell, you know. those sort of things can happen. So
I've
Yeah,
lost balance standing in
you
a
spend
ton of
enough
boys'
time in
lives.
the field, like inevitably
Yeah.
something's going to happen, and you just have to hope that like nothing too serious ever happens to you. But I've seen people that I've been with like really, really severe heat stroke, like just in a bad way. Like dehydration and just exposure to the elements is a bit of a killer. But then you couple that with clambering around remote rock outcrops and escarpment and climbing trees, and it's a wonder more herpers don't die, to be honest.
Well, Peter Rankin died.
Exactly. That's a classic,
right? So,
classic story.
Not everyone dies from snake bite. I mean, there's been a few snake bite deaths as well, and me not drinking enough water and getting emergency surgery after a trip up west for that.
Him still not drinking water.
These things happen, right? You're talking about smacking your head on a rock. I smacked my head really badly. The first time I went out to Lawn Hill, and I was walking across one of the causeways that I can't remember if it was the Gregory River or the Isis River is the other one that's there, I think. One of the two anyway. I was walking across the causeway and I just didn't see the really fine algae that was on the causeway, and I just fucking bushed it straight down, smashed the shit out of the head, about the back of my head, and had a cut that far across on the back of my head, super glued it back together and all the rest of it. But I had a thumping headache for a week after that.
Yeah.
So,
and I feel so bad. I laugh. I don't mean to. It just happens. I laugh. Whereas when I hurt myself, he's like, "Oh my God, are you okay? What do you need? What can I do?" And I'm like, "Please laugh so I feel better next time you injure yourself."
Sure. We don't talk to her about escalators in Germany though. So,
good stuff.
Last time I carry 30 kilos of books for you, mate. If that's the thing I get. So James is just over 3 now. Do you reckon he's going to follow in your footsteps?
I hope so. He's I mean, I guess it's one of those things when you have a kid of your own, you obviously want them to love reptiles and be passionate about herpetology like you are. But I'm trying not to like force it on him too much, because I don't want him to like get to 8 years old and be like, "Oh man, all my dad's ever done my whole life is like talk about snakes." I kind of want him to just kind of naturally, just come along with me on a few, little trips and just kind of get the bug himself. And he at the end of the day, he can do whatever he wants. But he's showing some promising early signs. He definitely loves a backyard Lampripholus catch here and there. So most of the Lampripholus running around our place don't have tails, courtesy of James. So,
obviously, you've carved out a pretty successful career as a zookeeper thus far. For James, when he's a couple more years in his advancement from what he is at the moment, what sort of advice would you give him on how to be a zookeeper? What's the there's lots of kids that go, "I want to be a zookeeper." Well, how do you actually do it?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes you talk to, if you were to sit a group of 7 or 8 year olds down, sometimes zookeeper, pops up as much as like, fireman or an astronaut. Like it's one of those things like kids want to be a zookeeper, but it's, I guess what a lot of people don't realize going into it is it's bloody hard work. And a lot of people don't want to put in the work. Yeah. And, I guess, over the years, I've seen, countless volunteers kind of come and go, and some got jobs and a lot didn't. And I think what makes people stand out are the people that just kind of do their own, self-development as well. Like, they ask for the help while they're, they might be at a zoo once a week or whatever. But then when they're not there, they're going home and they're researching and they're trying to find out everything they can about about the industry or about a certain species, and they're coming in the next week with questions, and it's pretty obvious when someone's actually genuinely interested and eager to pursue something. Whereas you see a lot of people that just kind of come into it with a bit of a mindset that it's different to what it is, and they don't want to put in the work, and they don't go and do that additional work. So it's always inevitably it's the people that are there for their volunteer day half an hour before the keepers rock up, that get the job because they just so eager. And it's not always the people that know the most either. Like you can have someone that's an absolute encyclopedia, but their work ethic is horrible. You need to have the mix. And sometimes if someone's got a good work ethic and then can go on and do the research and catch themselves up on everything they need to know, that's often a better person than someone that comes into it with a whole lot of prior knowledge but a pretty terrible attitude. So it's I think it's just one of those things. You work hard, you show that you're eager, you show that you're keen, and you'll get a job. It's made out to be such a competitive industry, but this day and age, there's a lot more wildlife parks than there used to be. There's a lot more roles than there used to be too. I think that's any industry. It's just the way places are internally structured now. There is a lot more jobs available. So if people do want to get into the zoo industry, they can certainly do it, and it may not necessarily immediately be exactly with what they want to be working with. Maybe they have to go and work with native mammals or primates or something for a couple of years, and then they get into big cats or reptiles or whatever it is. But if people want to do it and they have the right attitude and they put the work in, it's certainly doable.
Who would be 3 zoos that you would recommend people follow on Insta?
The Bronx Zoo is obviously a very famous zoo. It's been around for a very long time. I went there when we did our US trip, and it's an incredible zoo. Like for a zoo that is literally smack bang in the middle of the Bronx in New York, just surrounded by the concrete jungle that is that whole area of the States. It's a very well presented zoo. It's got a lot of very interesting things about it too. Like obviously they get some very severe winters in that part of the country. They get massive snowfall and things like that. So a lot of their tropical species are kept indoors, but they've got enormous like football pitch sized like greenhouses, and it's a really interesting way. Like there's no zoo really in Australia that keeps animals like a lot of those kind of northern US and European zoos do. There's kind of a really strong focus on doing tropical species very, very well, but in essentially indoor situations. It's a very interesting way to keep animals. So the Bronx Zoo would certainly be one. There is a zoo in, let me quickly look it up because it's definitely worth looking into and following. It's in Spain, I believe. Maybe. It's in Europe somewhere, but it's called Singapore Zoo. Is definitely an incredible zoo that I've been to a couple of times now. But this zoo is called Biopark Fuengirola. I don't even know how to say
Sorry,
it.
what was that?
We'll make sure we put it in the show notes for sure.
If you just search like Biopark, and that's like Biopark with a C at the end, not a K. Biopark in Spain, I believe it is. That is an incredible zoo. Like to get on YouTube and look at a few videos and things of that place, because like the level of detail and just their exhibits are just pretty extraordinary. Like I've looked at a lot of zoos and a lot of zoo exhibits, and I would have to say that's probably right up there with the best I've seen anywhere in the world. And then maybe for a third zoo, Symbio Wildlife Park, definitely. Definitely. That can be our last one. That's a good one.
I'd just like to apologize if anyone can hear that noise. It is the dog snoring behind us.
No, it's not. Don't be. You just had it.
Give over. You take some cracking photos. What do you shoot with?
Oh, thank you. I actually am still using pretty much the exact same setup that I started taking photos with. So as a bit of a graduation gift when I finished high school, my parents, I might have put in some coin as well, I can't remember, but I got a Canon 60D, which are pretty much discontinued now. It would be very hard to get one, I think, even secondhand these days. But I guess it's kind of like a mid-range Canon body, and it's a great camera. Like I've looked after it. I constantly get made fun of from people I go on trips with about how pedantic I am with cleaning my camera, because I just hate, I hate cameras being covered in sand and dirt and grime, and everyone's heard the sound of a lens when it's got sand in the focusing ring, and I don't love that. So I've kept it very clean and I've looked after it, and it's still going like just as good as it did the day I bought it. So I'm still using a Canon 60D. I shoot with a 60mm macro. For a long time I was using a 90mm, and I even used 100mm for a while. But I just found that with larger animals, like if you were photographing a decent sized monitor or even a lot of elapids, you were just kind of so far away from the animal that it kind of made things almost harder. Probably safer, but trickier from a photographic standpoint. And I just find the 60mm is perfect for me. Just it's what I like using. And then, like a lot of people, I use two external flashes, which are triggered by the camera's onboard flash. And I've experimented a lot over the years with lighting. I've used everything from tiny little soft boxes to like big giant soft boxes, and I don't like the how clunky and difficult it is to set up like massive big lighting setups in the field. I just find it takes a bit of the enjoyment out of it. So these days I'm using some LumaQuest soft boxes, which are probably only maybe like 250 by 250 mil, so not huge, but I mean big enough to still push out some nice light. And usually I'll just kind of either sit one on the ground or hold one, or just sit both on the ground. Just kind of depends what I'm shooting. Sometimes I'll just use one flash, even if it's something in a tree or whatever. Oftentimes I just find it easier to hold the camera with one hand and just hold the flash with the other. But yeah, that's about it really for gear. One thing I started mucking around with, it's not really related to photography, but certainly related to herping, is red filter on head torches. I know it's pretty big in the mammal world. Like obviously it's pretty widely known that it kind of limits disturbance a little bit and is probably better for things' eyes, especially mammals that have big eyes and big pupils and things like that. But I first heard about using red filters to eye shine for geckos from maybe Brendan Shembry or Chris Jolly or Steven Zazaya, one of those guys. That's they're obviously very experienced in the field, all of those fellas, and had started doing this. And I had heard that it was making it a bit easier to pick up on very tiny eye shine, things like phasmid geckos and, you know, little heteronotia and things like that. But one thing that I hadn't factored in was how much easier it makes life when you're approaching an animal. I just noticed with a few species, particularly when I was up in the Kimberley, like Pseudothodactylus cavaticus, the big western giant cave geckos, and also definitely Felicipoda. They were both very skittish and very sensitive to movement, but also a lot of light, and they would tend to retreat, you know, even when you were 20, 30 meters away from the animal. You'd see the eye shine, and then you'd see the gecko pretty rapidly moving away as you approached them. They tended not to stick around. And then as soon as I switched over to using a red filter, I could walk straight up to them. It just made life like so much easier. It was like they weren't really registering the light as easily. Felicipoda especially was still very sensitive to like movement and commotion. So it was kind of like this, almost like this tactical SWAT approach to getting close to Felicipoda. I had to kind of be like stealthy and silent and also combine the red filter, and that's how I managed to kind of in saying that, I've seen a video of someone walking up to a Felicipoda with a bright white light and just grabbed it off the rock. Like that. So maybe it was just the ones where maybe it was the area where I was looking for them. They were particularly skittish, but they'd probably never seen people before, certainly where we were. So yeah, that's just probably one thing that I thought I'd mention in terms of gear, because it's
certainly should have taken like Anacylus australis and Lindery are both very skittish. As soon as you get the light on them, they're out. They just do not like it. And
yeah,
you know, with australis, like they'll roll around the branch pretty quickly.
Or pop back into a hollow that they've had their head just sitting out of. Yeah, I mean they're all great geckos, but they are certainly a lot trickier to get close to than a lot of things.
Yeah. Have you ever witnessed or experienced, I mean, I suppose you haven't experienced directly, but have you witnessed or experienced misogyny within your career? And in your opinion, what do you think we could do to help stamp it out?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully I haven't really witnessed it, I guess to a severe degree. I think as with any industry, you know, women in general are, you know, the things they can do these days, it's very different to 30 or 40 years ago. And I think that's particularly applicable to zookeeping and herps as a whole. Like, you know, zookeeping for a very, very long time was kind of very male dominated, and these days we see so many female, not just zookeepers, but like female herp keepers. Certainly, I think there's far more women interested in herps as a whole than there was even when I was first starting out. You know, going to things like herp societies, like you would never see, you know, maybe the president's missus or something would show up because she had to, and that was the only, you know, woman in the room. It was like, you know, it was very, very different. But in saying that, I mean, I've worked, you know, at Reptile Park. You know, obviously have Robin Weigel, who in the, you know, the 70s and 80s was milking more snakes than anyone and wrangling king cobras. And so, you know, there's definitely still been some kind of pretty influential female figures in Australian herpetology. But you know, thankfully these days I think it is becoming more and more commonplace. You know, even with things like venomous snakes, it was, you know, historically probably not an area within zoos that women were involved with, dangerous animals as a whole. I'm sure, going back 50, 60 years, very few women would have been working with crocodilians or venomous snakes and things like that. And that's certainly changed a lot, which is a good thing to see.
Definitely.
And
So
I will say too, female herp keepers are often very much more meticulous and less prone to take unnecessary risk and things like that. So there's a lot of advantages to a female keeper in a zoo setting. It's good, and it's good to see a lot more of them around.
Yeah, definitely. So we do a little segment called 60 Seconds Under the Basking Spot.
Yes.
When you travel, do you prefer the window or the aisle seat?
Aisle, because I'm 6'4".
Are you an accomplice or a ringleader?
Probably an accomplice, to be honest.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Do you typically follow your heart or your head?
My head, I think, most of the time.
Order or spontaneity?
Order, definitely.
Macro or wide angle lens?
Macro.
Do you learn by watching or doing?
Doing, definitely.
Are you a minimalist or a hoarder? Ooh.
Minimalist, I'd like to think. Unless it's hurt books.
Unless it's herp books.
Yeah. We all love to hoard those.
No. Clothes on the floor or in the hamper?
Say that again, sorry.
Clothes on the floor or in the washing basket?
Oh, if you ask my wife, she'd probably say the floor for sure.
I was going to say, Brady's going to listen to this.
Right next to the washing basket is where they need to go.
Or in any other room where the washing basket isn't.
Yeah.
Does pineapple go on a pizza?
Yes. Controversial.
Isn't it?
Mate, it is sitting at about 70%. Yes, it does.
Oh, good. I love pineapple.
So do I.
It's funny how that one question can divide so many people.
Yeah.
Oh, I got one other one. Palmy or Palmer?
Well, I usually say palmy.
Yeah, I do too.
Palmy.
You and your Victorian lingo.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think that is a big thing.
Yeah.
Oh, the lingo is totally different from Victoria to here. It's amazing. The slang. I remember when he moved up, and his dad was like, "How can I give the kids a pineapple for their birthday? Here it's a $50 note." And I'm like, "Oh, that's really nice." Yeah, I'm like, "Oh, I think they prefer apples." And he's like, "What?" I've never heard that my entire life, and I lived in New South Wales as well. What's the one takeaway you'd like the audience to get from this episode?
It's a big question. I guess just to, obviously for us, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast, it's probably herpetology, but just to find something that you're passionate about. Sometimes I speak to people, then they're just kind of going through life and they don't really know what they like, and I can't really get my head around that, because I guess our passion and our interest is so all consuming. But yeah, I would encourage anyone, and I'll certainly be encouraging James to find what he's passionate about and pursue it to whatever degree you want to. But yeah, I think it's important to have something that you can kind of devote yourself a bit to. And reptiles are a pretty good option if you ask me.
Sure.
There's so many facets of it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. You can take it so many ways.
Yeah,
definitely.
Is there anything we haven't covered in this episode that you want to say before we close out?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot. It's been a good chat. The time has the time's flown by. But
Yes.
no, I don't think so. I think I think we've covered off on a lot of topics, which has been good.
Where can our listeners find you, mate?
I knew I was going to laugh when you asked this question, because I always just think back to the way Busho responded to this question when you asked him. Under an acacia in the scrub.
That's what you want to say. Go for it.
No, I don't.
What's the occasion in your place, mate?
Nah, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't spend as much time in the Pilbara as Busho, so I'd have to say mostly on Instagram. That's probably the best place to get a hold of me. I don't use Facebook too much these days. But I've got a personal page which I pretty much exclusively post like a little bit of zoo stuff, but mostly just wild, like all my herping pics. And I mean, I try and keep my Instagram like semi educational too. Like I won't just throw up a pic. Usually I'll try and, you know, put a bit of a decent caption with some good info about the species and that. So yeah, that's my personal page, which is just my name. I think it's just Jake Meney, literally. That's it. And then for all the rock work stuff, I started posting a little bit of rock work on my personal page, and then I just thought I would go ahead and just make it a totally distinct thing. So my business is called Crete, like as in concrete, so CRETE, Crete Habitats and Designs. So if people want to follow me on there won't be really any herp photos posted, but that's where I'll post my you know, any kind of rock work or trees or anything projects I'm working on at the time. And I really should post more on there. I'm very slack when it comes to taking, you know, progress photos and things like that. Usually I get to the end of something and I've like painted it and I'm like, oh, I probably should have taken a million photos along the way. But you get caught up in the creativity of it, and you forget to take photos or footage along the way. But yeah, that's where I post most of my my work that I'm doing outside and also at Symbio. So, yeah.
And so you're also doing that as part of the business, right? So people can contact you if they want one of these incredible creations. You can come to a little bit of a quote.
Yeah, to be honest, I started doing a few like backgrounds and things for private keepers, but the zoo work has kind of largely taken over and is keeping me more than busy enough. So if people are interested in backgrounds for enclosures, certainly still reach out, because I may be able to help. Generally, the way that I'll do jobs for private keepers is I'll ask to either pick up the enclosure if they're local, or if they can bring the enclosure to me, because it's just so much easier for me to work on it. I've got all my, you know, tools and gear and a bit of a workshop set up here, and I can knock it out a lot easier than I would on site at someone's house, and then they can just come and pick up, or I can deliver the finished product at the end. So that's the easiest way for people to get kind of backgrounds done in their private reptile enclosures. But in saying that, I can certainly do you know, just standalone features. Like if you want a water bowl, or you want a little ficus stump to sit in the corner or something, just something to add to the enclosure. You know, everything's kind of very custom and bespoke. So whatever people can kind of come up with, I can probably help them out. And if I can't help out, I can always kind of steer them in the right direction to either, if they want to have a crack themselves and you know, learn a new skill in the process, or you know, deliver them on to someone else that might be better suited to their needs as well.
You just delivered a workshop too, didn't you? In regards to
I did a 2-day workshop as part of the ASZK conference that was held down at Melbourne Zoo. So kind of simultaneously to me working on that meerkat rock heater, I also did the 2-day workshop at the zoo, which was awesome. It was 16 people from zoos all around the country. I even had 2 people come down from Port Moresby Nature Park in New Guinea. So there was people from literally, a long way away, and yeah, they came down not only for the workshop but also for the conference. But yeah, the workshop was 2 days, and everyone got to kind of learn the basics and do their own little project. And that was something that they kind of got to keep as a bit of a memento at the end of it as well. They could take it back to their zoo and chuck it in an exhibit, or take it home and do whatever they want with it. But yeah, it essentially just covered the basics of sculpting and carving and painting, and kind of just the general stuff that you need to know. It's a pretty hard thing to teach in a just a 2-day course. It's like, when you see those couple of day, venomous snake handling courses, it's like, how much can you really teach someone in 16 hours or whatever the total time that you're with them is. But it was really well received, and I'm sure it's something that I'll potentially offer more of down the line, because there was certainly more interest in it than I could kind of provide for. Unfortunately, we did have to cap it. Just I'm only one person divided by quite a number of people that were all asking lots of questions and wanting some advice. Yeah. So I think if I had any more people, it would have got very, very difficult. But certainly something I might try and look into doing more of in the future.
That's awesome. Well done.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for having me on. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for listening to the Cold-Blooded Contributions Podcast. The Cold-Blooded Contributions Podcast is proudly sponsored by Midwest Tongs. For over 40 years, the Midwest Tongs team has provided the highest quality snake handling tools made in the USA, made by professionals for professionals. Visit Midwest Tongs at www.tongs.com. A massive thank you to our guest, Jake. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. Usually we'll be releasing our podcast monthly, so make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on an episode. We will put the links mentioned in today's podcast in the show notes. Give the Cold-Blooded Contributions Podcast a like on Facebook so you don't miss any updates, giveaways, or guest announcements. Did you enjoy the show? If you want to go the extra mile and support what we're doing, we've set up a Buy Me a Coffee page. It's a super simple way to support the podcast for the price of an iced coffee. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/nature4you, or click the link Buy Me a Coffee in the show notes. And remember, always trust your creativity. It's intelligence having fun.